KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by Dagan, Mr. Blue Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
What's up, Mr. Green? Dagan smash! I wish I had my Hulk fists.
Oh, yeah.
Used to have those.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Many moons ago, actually, a lead animator that I was working under was like a huge Hulk fan. And he gave me a set for, I guess it was Christmas or something, at the studios many years ago. But they were awesome. They were so rugged. Like, you could just pummel those things to no end, and they just lasted forever. I don't know. I feel like they don't make toy. That was probably only like a dozen years ago or so.
I was going to say, we had a few of those at IGN, and we would like beat the shit out of each other with them. We also had, like,
they were soft enough to do a lot less harm than your real fist.
Razor scooters with like your fist out as a joust or whatever.
Did it make Hulk yelling sound effects, or did it make bashing sound effects?
I don't remember. I think our noises were long ago broken. Like, because the editor in chief when I got hired was Jeremy Dunham. People might know him he's the founder of Podcast Beyond, but he's also the VP of Psionics, the guys that make Rocket League.
Oh wow!
So congratulations to my friend Jeremy, who's, they got bought by
a little
Epic,
game called Rocket League.
Yeah, a little game called Rocket League, and now Jeremy has a little house on the beach in San Diego.
Wow!
So congratulations.
Graydon's good at that game, man. I watch him play sometimes. I never really played it, but super fun. I love the mechanics and
it's a great game. And I only bring him up because he's a huge Hulk fan, and like huge Hulk fan. And so he had like the fists and all the kind of stuff like that. Yeah, and it was right around the time when I got hired when this movie came out. So a little later. But
okay, interesting. Yeah. Dovetail. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Week? I'm all right. We're getting everything together. We were talking before we began. I usually don't like talking before we do podcasts to anyone. I think most people know that because I like to just it's what Greg used to say, save it for the show. That's what you used to say. And I actually think that's really good advice. But
yeah, smart.
We were chatting a little bit about the live show. So I'm trying to just like wrap up everything on that. I think that's really more. And I was talking to Mike a little bit about it because she's nervous about it a little bit.
What is she nervous about?
I don't know. She's just, she's never been in these situations before. I don't think.
No, I hear that.
But to me, I'm like, well, first of all the pressure's on me, so don't worry about it. Second of all, I really think that it's true. But I think from a logistical standpoint, all the pressure's on Dustin and Ben. So from my perspective, I'm just trying to like get things done early. Like we got the ads done early for Sacred Symbols. We're recording this early. I got to record Sacred Symbols Plus for next week and so on and so forth. So we're just trying to get everything in order so that we can go into the weekend with nothing to worry about, and then come back and just roll right back into the fall because it's going to get crazy, especially on Sacred Symbols because Deathloop's coming out and Tales of Arise and all that kind of stuff. Deathloop looks great. I can't wait for that game.
Yeah, from what I see, it looks super, super cool.
But yeah, otherwise everything's going good. I was thinking about you a little bit because I like to work out, as everyone knows, before I try to lead into the show. I work out, take a shower, and then come into the show. And I do that to like get my stress out, my anxiety, and to like just be at my top energy level or whatever.
Sure.
And so it's funny because I was thinking of you today because I don't know if you know this, but one other thing I like to do when I work out is I just sing the songs that I'm listening to. Like they're really loud and I'm just like basically screaming along to them.
That's awesome.
And it just like gets my energy up and all of that. And it just happened to be like a ton of like songs back to back where I was like, man, I'm going to belt these songs out. So it was like Madonna's Like a Prayer came on. And, Fuel's Hemorrhage in My Hands came on, which is a great, in my hands.
Eclectic mix.
In my hands again.
We need some footage of this. We need some video.
Micah could easily any day get it. And like, I would never know. She actually does have one because my playlist is eclectic, and I had Miserere by Allegri come up. That's like a 16th century chant from like the Sistine Chapel. It's fucking dope. It's like one of the great songs. It's I want to say it's like Psalm 90 or something like that, but it's sung and it's like an ancient song. It was so beautiful that it could only be performed in Sistine Chapel. And the rumor goes that it was something like, I think it was Mozart. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was Mozart went to the Sistine Chapel as a teen, was so taken by the song that he memorized it, and his notation of it was the first time anyone had heard it outside the Sistine Chapel. It was like a well-guarded secret. Yeah.
What? Would I know this tune? Is it so iconic that I would
I think you would if you put it on. Yeah, I'll send you a link. But So she took a video the other week because that just came on and it's like just this random song and Rush is just asleep in my like sprawled out on my my recliner, and she just has like a video of him with that Catholic music, 500-year-old Catholic music blasting in the background, and he's just out. So yeah, she puts up with me because I'm a little loud when I work out.
She definitely puts up with you.
But yeah, man,
between that and the pledge on the stairs, I don't know what's worse, my friend. I've been thinking about the trip because did I talk to you about this? You remember, I grew up with a guy named Jeff. Met him in high school from Long Island, skated together. Super smart dude. Ended up going to BU, and when we were in Philly, we used to trek out to Boston to skate together and everything like that. And then he ended up going to graduate school in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. Full ride, the whole thing. Okay. He's a super smart guy. His dad's like a nuclear physicist. Jeff went into tech. He actually is an entrepreneur. He developed like all these solutions for like big data storage, like corporate servers, I guess, essentially. And he lives in San Fran now, obviously. But we used to go visit him from Philly. Brian, my friend Brian and I used to take the bus across the state from Philly to Pittsburgh. So we did the drive many times, although I don't think we ever drove it. We were driven across. Right. And I have to say, man, Pennsylvania is Philly and Pittsburgh with about 5 or 6 hours of absolutely nothing in between, except roads, trucks, and truck stops. Like, it's like, I mean, Harrisburg is in there. Shout out to the capital of the state. But otherwise, it's going to be an interesting drive because I haven't driven by myself for 5 or 6 hours in years since I lived in Connecticut. You know, I used to live up in the Hartford area. So, and Helene was here. So we used to make that, which was about a 6-hour drive. Same thing. So it's going to be proper adventure, you know, going to the rest areas, getting a cup of coffee, a little solitude.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it sounds nice. We're driving too, just because from
Richmond you are driving?
We are driving. Well, only because from Richmond to Pittsburgh, there's no direct flight. So it is like the quickest you're going to do it, take off of your first flight to landing of your second flight is 4 hours. So it's like, might as well just drive.
That's insane.
Yeah. Because you have to fly to like LaGuardia, or you have to fly somewhere. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. You could get all the way to California in that time.
Whew.
So,
all right.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that as well. So yeah, that's just basically what's been occupying me, and you know, just getting these things done. We're obviously also preparing to do Metal Gear Solid 2, which has been a long time in coming. So I've been playing that, and
yeah, it's fun. It's been fun. I've been enjoying that.
Definitely, I have copious notes about that too, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's get into the Incredible Hulk.
Look at us.
The MCU film, the second MCU film from. Now, I didn't realize this. Actually, for some reason, I thought this was a 2009 movie. You know, when I was looking at it, it's 2008. It came out like right when Iron Man came out. Now, I didn't realize, and I think I did know this, but I just didn't make the connection that Universal has still retained, I guess, Hulk and the rights to Hulk today. Like what's interesting, and that's what I was reflecting to Micah about this. I'm like, it's funny. They made the decision very early that Sony made much later. And I think they were really smart to do it, which is like, no, we'll play ball and we'll just make money on our character, and you can use him in the Avengers or whatever he's in, you know. So
there was some more, rented him out.
Right. And Sony, which owns the film rights, obviously, to Spider-Man, was very hesitant to do that. And finally, I think, allowed that to happen.
Yeah, they
were excited about maybe in Civil War or something. I have no idea when that happened.
For money.
Right, of course. And I don't blame them, by the way. It's the same thing with Fox. Fox still, I think, controls like X-Men, right? And stuff like that. I think they're just playing ball now,
I think they still have their hands in that, yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone's just playing ball. Because I have to look into it, but I'm pretty sure the deals were in like perpetuity. And I just, again, cannot believe that Marvel is so hard up that they did that.
Oh,
and it's just, it's like incredible to think about that.
Oh, they were in fire sale territory. We talked about that with Iron Man. It's amazing. It really is. You know, it's so funny too, Kyle, like with the Universals and the Sonys, like you could see, like, even though this was 12, 15 years ago, there's such a struggle to stay relevant and I guess to stay liquid, you know? So when you have properties like this, you know, Disney technically owns Hulk, but there's, you know, Universal is still paying, you know, they're still paying Universal a fee, I guess technically is how it works, which is, you know, it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting story, this film. And then springing out of the Ang Lee, Eric Bana, 2003, Jennifer Connelly mess and all that. Very, very interesting to go back and look at this. And I'm excited that people are excited because we're continuing our MCU deep dive. We're on the next level down now after Iron Man. We're doing it pretty quick. So continuing our MCU journey.
I feel like, yeah, no, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's a bummer they won't even be able to get to the Avengers until next year because of, which maybe we probably wouldn't, but because of I've put in this like 10-year gap thing, but it's my show, and I think we'll make exceptions as we go along. We're just trying to control it so that everyone's not like, because this is the kind of stuff we have, and I'm just going to make fun of people in my make fun of you boys. Like, do a knockback about The Last of Us Part 2. And I'm like, The Last of Us Part 2 came out 14 months ago. So no, we're not going to do it. Yeah, John, stop.
Stop it, Matt.
God. And, so I'm trying to make and that's a common complaint. I mean, not about our show is like, it's just not old enough. I'm like, well, I agree. But I think that there are certain things, if we just pepper it in every so often, where we're going to override that 10-year thing, I think that's going to happen with the MCU. And I want to deliver it because I got to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to there's a lot of honesty going to happen on this show. I really liked Iron Man. And, I liked them. I liked it when I first saw it. I liked it a lot when I just saw it now. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's keep going. And I was kind of anxious to get into the Hulk because I was like, this is the one I really don't give a shit about. And you know what? It's a really good movie. It's a good movie.
Amen. We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you guys what Colin just said, just to expand on what Colin said too. A little aggravated that Hulk wasn't on Disney Plus, because Disney should have, I understand the relationship between Universal and Disney. And I know there's a lot of Disney detractors out there, and that's fair. Do what you want to do. But this movie should be on Disney Plus. It was so aggravating. I was so aggravated. I was all set to watch it, and then I had to go find it,
Thank you.
Look, it's Micah.
Yeah, there she is.
Oh, she's running away.
Yeah, she can't hear you. She'll never know you said it. She'll never see you. She'll never know you said anything to her at all.
But yeah, this should be an interesting conversation. I love what you just said too, because I have a similar sentiment, and I had never seen it.
Me neither. Yeah,
very similar to A Nightmare Before Elm Street last week, our last episode. I didn't know going in if I had seen this or not. I feel like I got caught up in the blur, Kyle, between, if you think of like the mid to late aughts, that whole period of live action superhero films, I feel like this one got lost in the shuffle for me. Ang Lee, Hulk, the earlier X-Men pictures, Green Lantern, the Fantastic Four floppages that happened. Like, I feel like this got kind of caught in that whole maelstrom, and I was lumping it in unfairly, as it turns out. So this was a treat. So this will I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, me too. I was surprised. I think that the movie gets weaker in the second half. I was actually really into it for like the first half an hour, 45 minutes. I'm like, this is great.
Good stuff.
Especially because they were just very resistant to show the Hulk. I thought it was, I don't know. I also like Ed Norton a lot. Now I'm a little disappointed to read about everything that happened with Ed Norton with this film, because I knew something must have happened. My assumption was, and I think his assumption or his claim was, that it's a money situation. And it's funny because I was reflecting. I'm like, he may be the most natively famous person that has ever been in an MCU movie. Like, when you think about fame going into it, respect going into it.
Sure.
Like, who else would really be there? I don't know. Most of these people were made by these movies. Or
point.
Mark Ruffalo, for instance, was like a very indie guy who became like a mainstream guy, largely because of his role in the Avengers and stuff. So So I was like, that makes sense to me if that's true, but it seems like he had a lot of strife. And actually a really interesting quote that we'll talk about later, talking about the magic of movie making and all that, which I actually really like the quote he has to say about that and his defense of the film. But from a high end, I mean, let's just begin. What do you remember about this movie coming out? Because I must be honest, we were talking about the Hulk fist and my time at IGN and all that. That's really the only reason I was even aware this movie came out. And it goes to show you that it's literally in the shadow of Iron Man a couple months later. And I literally just do not remember that at all. I thought for some reason it came out later. Remember, there were video games, I think, that came out around it. But yeah, I never saw it, was never interested in seeing it. And I also have to say this, like, I know a little bit about Iron Man, for instance, right? Like a little bit about the X-Men. Like, you have some sort of frame of reference. And I don't know anything about the Hulk. I know that his name is Bruce Banner.
Right.
I know that when he gets angry, he flips out and turns into the Hulk. That was literally it. In fact, I was like, I think I was annoying Mike a little bit because I was like, who is the bad guy? Like, who? Because I was racking my brain. I'm like, who is his like Joker? I don't even know. Yeah. I have no idea. And I still have no idea, in fact, like who his arch nemesis is.
Yeah, his rogues gallery.
Right, exactly. I have no idea who comes from this. So it was kind of an interesting thing. And I think the movie does a pretty nice job of familiarizing me at least with what I guess is the overarching story. And I was a little surprised by this too, that the Hulk and Iron Man have very similar themes. And I don't know if this theme keeps going or not. It's an anti-war theme and an anti-weapon theme. And I don't know if that's just like a Marvel thing. I have no fucking idea because I just don't know. So it was a fun experience to watch it. What do you remember about this experience at first? And do you remember anything about when it came out?
Yeah, again, for me, it gets caught up in that whole time period of like those lukewarm entries into the live action, superhero genre, knowing at that period that Marvel was still struggling financially and there was a lot of flop sweat and it seemed like they would do anything just to stay afloat. And I really remembered like thinking about this movie in terms of all those other entries that were like, you would see an earlier X-Men film or something or Green Lantern and be like, this is okay. But like, I guess partially 50% not really knowing the comic books that well. And then also the other 50% of like, just knowing that they weren't doing those historic properties justice and unfairly lumping this in and just probably deciding, hey, I'm not even going to see this. I think it is a really important point that you bring up for your generation, Kyle, because you, being born in 84 and people around your age would have completely missed the Hulk. He wasn't really on the pop culture radar, I don't think, at that time. Now, I grew up, being born in 73 with the 77, 78 Hulk live action TV series, which was a very important part of my early childhood. Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno. I think of that in the same breath as the Linda Carter Wonder Woman live action show. We grew up with those. Those were on TV. Those were as big as Happy Days or Brady Bunch or Dukes of Hazzard. Like those were a staple on television. And I remember being really fascinated with the Hulk and that whole as a little kid, 3-4 years old, the transformation, sort of the iconic, springing out of the iconic comic book with being so colorful with the Hulk, and he's bright and he's big and he's got the purple pants on, which they pay homage to in the film, which I thought was really cute. And sort of being like my introduction to a group of superheroes, thinking about Hulk and Spidey and Iron Man in the same breath because of the Avengers. And I think I was always attracted to sort of the big tough in a superhero group, the muscle, the unstoppable fighting machine. We think of Hulk, we think of the Thing, later on we'd have Colossus in the X-Men. I kind of think of Cable in the X-Force in the same breath. Later on we'd have Bad Rock from Liefeld and Image and the Max, but they all sprung out of the Hulk. I mean, the Hulk sprung out of the Thing like a year later from Fantastic Four. I think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby came up with the Hulk springing out of like the success of the Thing. So it's interesting that the Thing came first, but I've always been attracted to that. And also sort of like the Jekyll and Hyde story, maybe a little Frankenstein themes thrown in, sort of the ungovernable anger and the uncontrollable rage, that type of thing. And also the dynamic of having that superhero that's like a berserker or a wild card. I always think of, this is a really nerdy similarity, but I always think of Vincent in Final Fantasy VII. Somebody that is really powerful, but you don't, and it's kind of worth unleashing him to see what happens because of that superior strength and power, but maybe he's going to do good for your party and maybe he's going to turn on you and destroy you. That whole excitement is really fun. And I remember the Hulk being such an important, iconic hero, even as a little kid. We had the Underoos, we had the comic books on the drugstore spinner racks, we had the t-shirts. Like, it was just as big as Batman, Spider-Man, the Justice League when we were kids with Aquaman and Wonder Woman and everything and all the DC properties. So it was really fun and I think this movie was just a surprise for me. It moves at a really brisk pace. I was thoroughly entertained. I was compelled. I was rooting for our hero and heroine. And I was expecting, I like Ed Norton a lot. I think, he comes with a lot. He comes, even into this movie 12 years ago, he came with a lot of cachet, right? He had the acting chops. We know him from American History X, of course, and The People vs. Larry Flint, and of course Fight Club, which we're going to do an episode on, I think relatively soon, I hope.
Definitely.
And
awesome.
25th Hour, which is a Spike Lee joint, probably one of my top 100 movies, and then fun things like Rounders and The Score, where he's working with De Niro and Brando. So But I like Ed Norton a lot. I think he's a wonderful actor. I would even even though I think Mark Ruffalo comes with that warmth and that charm and that charisma that I like to see in a Bruce Banner, and I understand why he plays Bruce Banner. I think he's really good in the role. I would say Ed Norton has better acting chops. But there's a cold quality to Ed Norton that I wasn't sure was going to work, and I was thoroughly surprised by him and the entire cast. I think if you look at the cast, if you look at all the players, it's really it's really strange.
I agree.
You see Ed Norton, you see Tim Roth, Liv Tyler, and we'll get into everybody. Ty Burrell. I mean, this is a really strangely cast movie, and it works to a T. So I was really pleasantly surprised at the outset that I enjoyed it from the first minute. I think the movie weighs in at like $1.52. It's almost 2 hours. I feel like it didn't. You said the second half drag. We'll have to have that conversation. But I feel like it moved pretty quick. I didn't feel like a 2-hour film. And it's just nice when you spend the time to watch something and it's just completely absorbing and flew in the face of what I thought it was going to be, which I always think it's going to be weird to do something really crappy on the show and just be very, very critical of it. But it didn't happen with this. So I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, very well said. I love what you said about the cast because it does work. I think one character doesn't work because of his physical relationship with another character. I want to talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I agree with what you said. First of all, I think Liv Tyler is really great and really charming in this film. I feel a little bit bad for her beau because we don't really get any resolution with that. It's like, it's kind of fucked up in a way. I love that. I forget that guy's name, but he's, from Modern Family.
Yeah. That's Ty Burrell.
Ty Burrell, right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's Ed Norton's one of those guys where I'm like, man, I love Ed Norton. And you think back to, hey buddy, you think back to Rounders, and you think back obviously to the People, like you said, People versus Larry Flint. I love
Rounders. Rounders is so good.
It is
such a good movie.
American History X and all of that.
Oh,
he's not the score, which I actually really love as well.
He's so good in that.
Yeah, that was with De Niro, I think, right?
Yeah, De Niro and Brando.
He plays like a mentally retarded guy in the beginning, like right in the beginning. There's like a really great scene.
He's acting. That's his whole. His whole game. That's his real game. Yeah.
And I saw that in the theater. I don't know why, but I guess
that's a Frank Oz movie.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, he directed that.
I don't think I knew that. So yeah, I was looking at his filmography, and it just seems like a guy that, very similar to what we say about Leonardo DiCaprio, certainly not as prolific, but where he doesn't do that much. Like, he doesn't do very many movies.
No, very picky filmography.
So I was a little surprised by that when it seemed like he was kind of wagging his dick around with the Hulk behind the scenes. He didn't have all of the power that he has now, I don't think, in the industry. So I find maybe that makes a little more sense of why he was replaced. Because I agree, I'm not a big Mark Ruffalo guy. Like, he's really good. I think he was great in that movie about the Catholic priests. What the hell was that movie called? Spotlight. And and a few others that he won. They won the Academy Award for that. But I actually liked the more. Not that I know how not that I know how Ruffalo plays the Hulk, because I don't. But he's a more meek and quiet, vulnerable character. I actually kind of liked it because I think that it was
well said.
It was dissonant from the Hulk, right? And I liked that. I don't know anything about the Ang Lee contentious 2003 version.
It's strange,
but I feel like this captured the Hulk in my opinion, in a way that made him most interesting. I think the movie drags because I don't like combat sequences that much. I don't like toys banging together, just like for like
action figures.
Yeah. And I was saying, as I was watching it, I was like, I actually started kind of just like not even paying attention during the fights. Cause like at the end, I'm like, I don't care. Like, you might as well just put 15 minutes of fighting in brackets and a black screen and then just be like, okay, thanks. And we'll just move on to the next thing.
You weren't in it for that.
No, because it's not, I like real fights. Like if you're watching The Last Kingdom or even Game of Thrones, which is supernatural in a way, but it's still realistic and awesome, and it's pent up and like you're waiting. It's not a movie, right? Or even Braveheart, where again it's pent up and you're waiting for the culmination, and it's a little bloody, it's a lot bloody, and it's a lot fucked up. But it's very similar to Transformers, where I'm like, I don't care about the movie Transformers, where I'm like, I don't
Yeah,
care
yeah,
about these things just banging against each other. I don't
Right.
even know what the hell's going on. And we know what's going to happen. Like, we know who wins. So that, to me, maybe it's not that it's too long. It's like, I wish you kind of just stayed with the more subdued pace of the film. And we actually have an interesting question about this, because I did want to ask you
Yeah.
about the very beginning, because I really found it clever. And the late Nate agrees. I think he wrote in and said, "Hey, Brothers M, what did you think of this movie putting a bunch of the backstory of how Bruce Banner became the Hulk into the credit sequence? Likewise, did you like the movie starting with Bruce already being the Hulk, or would you have preferred a more traditional origin story where it focuses on him first becoming the Hulk?" I actually like that they don't get into the origin story, because I feel like there's like that expectation. We often talk about it with Spider-Man, and like, how many times are you going to do this?
Yeah.
And Batman, like, how many? That's why I was really quite attracted to Batman's representation in Joaquin Phoenix's Joker film, because we see him later, and not when he's an adult, but we see him after the death of his parents. And it's like, finally, like, we get some sort of fucking Bruce Wayne character that's not watching his parents get killed in an alleyway and the diamonds dropping on the ground, and then like fast forwarding 20 years. And so I like that they kind of had the boldness to say, like, you don't care about the Hulk origin story. We don't want to tell you the Hulk origin story. What we'd rather tell you is the military chasing this super weapon. And I really dug it. What did you think about the establishment of the story and their choice to not get into how the Hulk became the Hulk?
I love it. I thought it was a really clever encapsulation of just you got to give the origin, because of course you're going into mainstream movie audiences. Some people know it, some people don't, some people know 50%. So you have to go in and give people something. But I love that they took the risk of just doing it so briskly in like that first 30 seconds to a minute or whatever, and just telling it really quick. They took a chance on that. And then you're able to make room, still weighing it at under 2 hours, you're able to make room for the more compelling part of the story. Plus, I think Hulk's origin story, you don't have to know every detail slice for slice. You could kind of cover it in just broad strokes, and I think a lot of people realize that. This guy ran afoul of some radiation, some gamma rays. It turns into Hulk. When he gets angry, he transforms, and it's actually a negative thing. It's actually a painful thing. It's actually a thing where he gets himself into trouble because he's a murderous nut job, becomes a complete maniac. And the contrast between him and, again, being that sort of meek, mild-mannered human scientist, and that Jekyll and Hyde dynamic. I think people just understand that about the Hulk. I think it's just a pop culture known commodity. So you don't even need that much. What do you need? You just need to, they give it to us, they refresh our memories in the first, 45 seconds, and then we're off, which is a clever way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I like when intros take advantage. It's not just like a vanity project. I often think about how much fighting there even is behind the scenes about the order that names are on the screen, how long they stay there, and all that. Like, there's a lot of fighting and like a lot of contractual stuff about that.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so it's a
big thing.
When it's more than just that, I think it's a clever use of runtime, because it's like, I hate that shit where you're sitting there for like 3 minutes and it's like all these names and it's like, who cares? Like, let's just get
it's
into
very
this.
Self-indulgent, but this was economical. And
exactly.
Yeah, a great use of space. Perfectly said, Kyle. Yeah. Very clever. You don't see it a lot.
No. And I like that. And I think it was obviously necessary. They realized it was necessary, and it's cleverly written, because they're not going to get into the origin. Therefore, people like me are coming in without much knowledge. Now, I don't think I'm walking away knowing much more than I did, but I know a little bit, at least. There's like little throwaway lines, like, okay, like Bruce Banner went to Harvard, and he has a girlfriend, I guess, and she's also a professor or something. And so it made me interested in that world. And I also am curious what you thought about just the kind of beginning. I feel like it didn't even feel like a superhero movie. Not that I've seen very many, I guess, in the context of things now, but I just really dug. It just felt like a movie.
Yeah.
It just felt like a film. I liked how he was in Brazil. I liked the entire intro not being in the United States. Much of the movie doesn't take place in the US, which was quite appealing. I was hoping it was never going to go there, but here we are. So what did you make of
back, right?
Like, it would have just been cool if it just never came here. Like, why do they have to come to the United States? Why can't it just all take place there? But regardless, what did you think of the whole Brazilian scene? his learning of Portuguese I thought was really cute.
That
like
was
watching
cool.
Sesame Street and saying the wrong things to the thugs and all of that. I do love the scene a lot when he finds the driver. He's in Guatemala or something like that. He talks Portuguese. The guy's like, I don't speak Portuguese. And when that happened, it's funny, when that scene first happened, I was like, oh, this guy is fucking with him. And it's a joke. Like like it was supposed to be a joke about an illegal immigrant coming to a Spanish speaking country. Like I thought that's what it was, but then no, he was being very earnest and say like, no, you're not.
No, I really
so anyway, I really enjoyed that opening, that first half an hour. I was quite riveted by it. What did you make of the whole Brazilian sequence?
Yeah, you're right. It feels very grounded. It doesn't necessarily feel like your prototypical superhero film. The cinematography is great. The acting is very grounding. I love that, Bruce is holing up in the slums of Brazil and trying to find ways to manage his anger and trying to train in Brazilian martial arts. And he's working at, it's sort of a day job in a bottling and a soda factory to like shades of Laverne and Shirley. Like it felt, and he's got like a little crush, like a little romance going on. He's kind of running afoul of the local thugs a little bit. He's trying to stay away from them, and they're not digging the local gringo of the group and everything. So it was really a lot of fun. And the whole time, he's hiding out. He's on the run. So you have that tension of, is he going to get found out? Can he stay undercover? Is the government going to find him? That type of thing is kind of playing in the background too, which is a lot of fun. I really like love seeing snapshots of foreign places that I'm not that familiar with. Like Brazil is one of those places on the planet that really fascinates me. I think you think of Rio de Janeiro specifically, but like when you think of just South America in general, I find it really captivating. And it's funny that it's so close in proximity to the United States, but it feels like worlds away. And I think they really captured that like they really seemed to capture what Brazil must feel like, or at least that section of Brazil, what it must feel like in the film. So I love stuff like that. It feels very visceral. And this movie had that along with the acting. It just felt really compelling. Like I was just down. It's just from the beginning, I was really down for Ed Norton, which I really don't find to be as great as he is at acting. I don't even find him that likable. Like even think about a movie like Rounders, right? Where he's like, Matt Damon is really the likable character in that. Ed Norton is fucking them all up in that movie.
Right.
But he's giving a great performance, but you don't really like him. American History X, same thing. He's repugnant, but
yeah, he's a good villain. Yeah, he's a
great. He really does play a great villain. So it was nice to see right from the outset. I'm like, I was really down for Ed Norton. I was really down for Bruce. He did a great job. I know we'll talk about, him sort of like throwing his weight around with the writing and rewriting. And I know Ed Norton fancied himself as this historically, as a kid, like he loved the Hulk and he felt like he wanted to do the property justice and all of that. But, all in all, at the end of the day, looking at this movie 12, 13 years later, he gives a great performance.
I totally concur. And yeah, what's interesting about Brazil? It's a country that's not discussed as much as I think it should be based on the population of the country and how big it is. It's like one of the biggest countries in the world, one of the most populous countries in the world after, you have India and China, obviously. Then I think the US would be third, and I think Brazil's fourth. I think that makes sense.
Is it really?
Right? Yeah, I think that's
I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, let me look here. Countries by population.
Because geographically, how big is it?
It's big, but let's see. Six. So it's China, India, US, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil. But Brazil, Pakistan, and Indonesia are all within several.
Indonesia, I didn't know that.
Indonesia 273. Indonesia has 3.5% of the world's population. Brazil has 2.7% of the population. We have 4%, obviously. China, 18.4% of the population.
Wow. Holy moly.
Very interesting indeed.
Unbelievable.
So, and of course, actually very interesting to hear. I'm looking at net migrants for the year. We have plus 954,000. China, minus 348,000. Shocking. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about that country just to the south of us that doesn't seem to come up very much.
It doesn't.
Fiction.
And you know what, Kyle? Yeah. I don't know if I'm educated enough to say this, but my feeling on Brazil, it's a little bit of East meets West too, as far as like, the not civilized, but economic strength, all that kind of stuff, consumerism, all that thing. It seems like half in, a little more primitive of a place and half very North American or something,
No, definitely.
It feels like a little bit of both, to me, which is fascinating because there's not a lot of places like that.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. It's fascinating that they speak Portuguese. I think that's just fascinating. That's a total.
That is, cool.
You have to go back and read about the Catholic Church in the 1500s and the various lines that they put on the maps and how Brazil was basically bulging out towards like this area where Portugal could still go and fuck around while Spain had to go further inland. And so that's why Brazil was Portuguese. But it is a fascinating place. I think a lot of that feel comes from they just have this vast untamed wilderness in the Amazon, right?
Yeah.
And so it really is like civilization. Plus, they've also, like many South and Central American countries, have embraced much more than we have their native cultures. So you have that whole thing as well, right? Like, because you have Portuguese and Spanish people, like immigrants. Plus, there are a lot of white people in Brazil. I don't think a lot of people realize that, but tons of white people.
Right.
Tons of white people in Argentina. A lot of them, some people that escaped World War II and Germans and all that, but others as well. And so, yeah, it's a very mysterious and interesting place. And you often only see it when like a Jason Bourne type character is like tearing through, or some Black Hawk helicopter strafing it in a movie or in a video game like SOCOM or something. I feel like this gave you a little bit more of a thoughtful look at it. What I thought was interesting was the MacGuffin with the pretty girl that he worked with. That never was revisited again. I was interested in that.
Never.
So I was like, but also it was just strange. I was like, what is this? Is this going to create a love triangle? They were almost setting up a different love triangle. Then they establish a totally separate love triangle with the other guy, which is also never resolved. So I thought that was interesting too. But
good point. Yeah.
What do you think about the suspension of disbelief that this movie requires? Now, all films in the superhero genres require some suspension of disbelief, but it's a little crazy. And I feel like this movie maybe doesn't deal with it as nicely as I would have liked. And it makes me worried about the future Marvel movies because, and I'm really curious what you think about this. Like, the US Marines just go to Brazil. They send us, and once all hell breaks loose, this is an international incident. Like, you can't send US Marines to a sovereign nation. It's not like you're sending them to Niger or Yemen and no one's going to know any better. So I thought that was weird. It's like, why wouldn't you like get in touch with the Brazilian officials? They'll help you. We're friends, And then so I thought that was a little strange. And then later in the movie, when we get back to the US and like they're just tearing apart things, and like the military is just like, there's like a shot where like a Humvee like jumps over a hill, and like I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? This would be like a massive incident of epic proportions. Like, the military is just running roughshod over this Culver University. Like, who gave the authorization for this military strike?
It's unbelievable.
I couldn't help. I know it's a little much, but I couldn't help but be there as well, where they do such a nice job for that first half an hour of making it really believable. And then Tim Roth, like, where does I don't even understand how Tim Roth gets in this film. Like, that's a whole other thing. Like, where, like, there's just a random scene where it's like, and on loan as a Royal Marine. And I'm like, why? Why do we need a Royal Marine?
By way of Russia, by the way.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
Which I think I read in the comic book that character is a KGB agent. Oh, but cool. Why not just leave the Russian origins from the comic alone and just make him like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, he couldn't be a villain and just be British. It's very strange.
What did you think about about the suspension of disbelief? It creates a little bit of a dissonance. It's the same thing with the Doctor character later, where they're doing all the experiments with Dr. Blue and Mr. Blue, Mr. Green. And it's like, cool. Like, they're getting somewhere. It seems like very mysterious, even when they meet on the steps.
Yeah.
And it's but then it gets so cartoonish. Like, I don't think they execute well enough.
No, you gotta bring a little bit of a different look for a live action film, especially something that's encapsulated inside of 2 hours. It's not a comic book. It doesn't breathe. You can't get away with the same thing on the screen as you can on the page. Where I'm sure, I don't know the origins too well of the whole comic book, specifically the stuff that's pulling from this storyline, but I'm sure it's very cartoony and comic booky and action packed, and it just runs amok. But when you in live action, when you have the rampaging U.S. military, and literally like every 20 minutes, there's armored vehicles just like popping out from somewhere, and they're everywhere and anywhere, and they're just completely running afoul of everybody, and they obviously have complete freedom to do whatever the hell they want, and you have this clandestine thing with the doctors and the scientists, which, you gotta ground it a little bit. I just saw it as cartoony and comic booky. I didn't really mind it so much, but it does actually get laugh out loud funny at times. Definitely. When here comes another set of armored vehicles popping out of the trees, and, apparently, it's just like this General Thunderbolt and his contingent are just, pursuing the Hulk at, they're sparing no expense. Like they want this guy, they want to weaponize this technology, this science, and they're going to stop at nothing to get it.
Right. And he also,
but it gets a little crazy.
It's cool too, because again, like they touch on it, but it's cool. Like the General and Elizabeth or Betty are father and daughter, which is a really cool. Like they don't really get too deep into that.
No, not at all.
They touch on it, but they don't get too deep into it. It's actually a really cool conversation when he's with Tim Roth and they're walking through like a hangar or something. He's like, this is very personal to me and to the military. It would have been cool if they spent a little more time on that and him being like, I'm literally just doing this on my own. Like they just needed to throw a few more lines in there to establish like what is happening here, because why would you be allowed to do something like this? It doesn't make any sense. And it brought up another question to me, which is answered obviously in the ending sequence, which is great. And by the way, kind of a what if of seeing Ed Norton and the General and Iron Man together. Yeah. Well, I guess they do get together, I guess, later on. I haven't seen any of those movies, but kind of a little bit of a what if in that universe. But I was curious if they were aware in this universe that Iron Man existed. Because when does this happen, in other words?
Right.
Because that was the other thing. And Micah brought up this point, which is good, which is she's like, maybe it's not so unbelievable if everyone is aware that Iron Man exists now. Because at the end, famously, Iron Man's like, I am Iron Man. So everyone knows like who he is, all the shit that happened. So when people see like a militarized situation, they're like, okay, like we know some shit's happening. Something is happening that's not normal. Right. Did you think about that at all? Because obviously they do exist in the same universe. We have that established at the end, but I feel like I needed to know earlier if everyone knew Iron Man existed, because it gave you the context.
Yes, it did. And it purposely put that in there.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. Of course, they know Tony Stark already in the capacity, like Thunderbolt obviously knows of Tony because of the weapons development thing. But does he know the alter ego already? Because these films run so close to each other. Without spoiling future movies for you, and some of the dynamics specifically, I forget. But yeah, you do think about that, and especially purposely, not post-credit in this case, but right at the end of the film, you see RDJ come in and he's doing the Iron Man, talking about the shield. There's other people, other extraordinary people in the universe type thing. We should band together type deal. So the movie makes that very important point. I think, if I'm not mistaken, a few movies in might spell that out a little clearer. But you also have to, something I thought about, Kyle, in watching this, I thought about it with Iron Man 2 a few weeks ago. There's a lot of retconning going on. Not only because of the Universal thing and the Sony thing, but because you're telling this protracted story about individual heroes, but also operating as this superhero team, and whose origins play cleanly into the others and their meetings. It's not always as clean as, like, of course, Captain America came first because of World War I, World War II, whatever. Like, some of these things come pretty close together. How does Hawkeye play in with Black Widow? Like, all these things. Sure. There's a lot of retconning going on. Only really huge MCU or Marvel fans will know this for sure. And of course, they'll know the comics too. But I'm sure there's some liberties taken. I'm sure it's not so clean, where it's like they're trying to orchestrate and curate the entire thing cleanly. I'm sure mistakes are made and things are overlooked. And things are later retconned 3 movies in. I think we're going to see that more and more as the MCU plays out. Of course, we're going in theatrical release order, which I think is smart. So I think those questions are going to continuously pop up. We're going to have to deal with those things.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm eager. more eager even now than because now we got through the Hulk, because I really was like, oh God, like it goes from Iron Man to the Hulk. I don't know why I was just so put off by that, just as a kind of in my ignorance, I guess. I do think Iron Man is a way cooler character than the Hulk, but yeah, it's interesting to candidly and admittedly be kind of more amped up to like keep going, it's like, okay, no.
Yeah, questions will be answered. You'll get more questions.
Right.
You'll kind of take 2 steps forward. You want 1 step back, maybe vice versa. It almost feels like trying to put the Zelda timeline in order. It's like, is it, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because they're like
how
all
much of this is
links
purposeful,
too, right, or something.
It's at the end of the day, it's box office dollars, right? And you're just trying to cash in. So unfortunately, that's a cynical take, but that's kind of what it is.
Isn't it the case with Zelda that they're all different links?
Yeah, and like supposedly like, there's like really avid fans that have tried to make the best sense of it, but then Miyamoto will say like, no, that's wrong, or he'll say he's actually been known to say the wrong things too, because he doesn't care.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. He's just trying to make great standalone games.
Yeah, there's other people.
He doesn't
get.
Believe me, Shigeru Miyamoto does not care about the Zelda timeline. I'm here to tell you that. You know what I mean? He cares about making a great game, and then he's inspired to make another great game. And so on and so forth. But there's people out there trying to put the puzzle together, and it's like, it's not meant to be like that.
it's funny too, because I can relate to this more as a creator now, because with the ending of Habroxia 2, it's kind of like there's like a cliffhanger, and people are like, what happened? What happens next? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have no fucking clue. That was me saying I'm out of ideas and I'll think about it later.
But you'll figure it out.
Yeah. It's up to me to figure out. I definitely look at Miyamoto as being like, I have no idea.
No clue.
What, and I don't care. And it was probably someone in Nintendo being like, we have to at least try to make this organized in some way. And it's like, all right, well.
Yeah, or he got blindsided and answered something he shouldn't have.
Right, exactly. And
which would happen to me so many times if I was in that position. So I sympathize completely.
I say shit all the time I'm not supposed to say. Like, and people just don't pick it up. Or most of the time they don't. Like things about games that are not announced. Like sometimes I'm worried where I'm like, how did the people not pick that up? But I also it draws to my mind, I guess, this entire idea that this is stronger than I thought. And gotta admit that. Now, I don't know where it goes from here, but these are kind of like really early days. So if it's good here, why wouldn't it necessarily be good later? I don't know. But I am interested in just kind of combining all of that stuff together and seeing what happens, as far as like, because I'm a little worried even about the Mark Ruffalo thing, and it's like, how am I going to feel about this and that?
Yeah, and that comes, he takes on the Hulk in 2012, so it'll be 4 years later in the Avengers, I think, in the first Avengers film. And he's good in the part. I like Mark Ruffalo. I mean, I think, you think of things, you think of turns he's done a lot of Broadway, I think. You think of turns he's done that are more Ruffalo-esque. He has a very specific, I think he's very charming. I think he has a very specific brand of acting. But then you also think of things he's done like Scorsese's Shutter Island, where it was just like straight up, he's starring opposite DiCaprio, like, pretty strong performance, Michelle Williams, like good shit. So, and I like the contrast of the, if you're going to have a really dynamic Jekyll and Hyde contrast, really have what you were saying earlier about him, gentle, meek, sort of that aw shucks type flavor. And then that really flies in the face of what the Hulk is, which is like this aggressive, angry, unstoppable force of nature that's just going to destroy everything. I like the contrast in the Ruffalo and his Hulk. But yeah, I think I'm really looking forward to seeing, all the players, the Captain Americas, the Thors, the Hulks, the Black Widows, the Hawkeyes. All, like, I'm really, really excited for you to see everybody, how they're cast and how they perform and how they kind of, brush up against one another and how it works for you. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
Right. By the way, I just have to bring up, I was just thinking about this with Miyamoto. Who else reminds me of Miyamoto is Harrison Ford. Same kind of guy. You ever see him get interviewed about Star Wars and like Han Solo and how little he cares about Han Solo? It's almost kind of sad, because that's like one of the great characters in the entire.
Oh my God, so good.
But there's a great shot of him saying like, someone was asking like who would win in a fight. I don't know, something like it was something like Han Solo or Indiana Jones, and then it just cuts him and he's like, I don't care. Like something like straight up frank, like dead serious, like annoyed.
He's one of those dudes, like, and I'm not sure Miyamoto's the same, or if Miyamoto's just a little more quirky and flighty and just like a true creative, but Harrison Ford seems like he's going to give it all to you on the soundstage. He knows exactly what he's going to do. He knows what he's going to impart to that character. We think of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, Han Solo, all the way down to like The Fugitive, right? Like he's going to bring it. And then as soon as that clapboard and they cut for the day and they're, eating their catering and shit like that, he just turns it off. He does not give a crap. He's very great.
It's very
weird.
But
he's not going to embody that thing outside of his job. He leaves it there. That's what it seems like to me with him specifically.
I definitely agree. And it's just so crazy because Mark Hamill is like the exact opposite. And you would think that, I don't know, it bothers me a little bit because it's like, don't you understand what these characters did for you? No one will give a fuck about you if you weren't Han Solo and Indiana Jones.
It's a good point.
First,
right.
Right. I know you did all of that. You did a bunch of great stuff. We loved you in Air Force One. We loved you in blah, but God almighty. And then he goes and crashes planes or whatever and he almost kills himself. So
it does take moxie to be like that. And he is completely opposite from Mark Hamill, who really embraces. I just watching an interview with him this morning talking about something involved with The Mandalorian, which I won't spoil for you or anybody else. But he was saying like, they were asking him about the fans again. He's like, the fans mean everything to me. They're why I'm here. He specifically said that. He's so appreciative and grateful, even if it's an air, which I don't think it is. I think it's very genuine with Mark Hamill.
No, I think it is.
But it is interesting how those two played two of the most important pop culture, nerd culture characters ever, shoulder to shoulder, are so completely different in real life. One's so grouchy and one's so appreciative. It's a funny dynamic.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, it is strange. That's an aside, but because in the beginning of our games, we put we literally the first thing you see when you put in a Lily Mo game, it says thank you for buying and playing our game. That's what it says on the screen before
it's important.
Our logo is shown, before you get into the game, anything like that. So yeah, I agree. It's important. All right. So we have a question. We have a question here.
Okay.
Get back into Bruce Banner. Alex Painter wrote into us on Patreon, just like you can. And he says, hey guys, so in regards to this movie, I feel this movie is about battling your inner demons. How you can't run from them like Bruce was trying to do, but they also shouldn't control your life like Abomination. Do you agree with this statement? Do you think that there's a message here? We were talking earlier, or I mentioned earlier, that I think that there's a serious anti-war message in these movies. I'm actually shocked that no one has brought that up to me, because they know how anti-war I am and how I'm passionate about writing those kinds of stories. Twin Breaker is an anti-war game, as we've said many times. And so I was shocked that no one tried to bring me in to say, like, these movies, at least in the beginning, are about like the military industrial complex that's like totally out of control. I mean, that's what the two movies are about. Right. But aside from that, I think that there is a meta message with the Hulk. And that's why I liked Ed Norton's portrayal, especially in scenes with Liv Tyler, with Betty, because there's a humanism to him. He loses it, but they don't really show him losing it too much. I mean, like, he has these big epic fights, but there's like a personality in there. And I love that there's that scene where Betty's trying to tell him, like, I think you're in there. Like, I think you're in there when you were protecting me in the cave. And he has this really great line. And when he kind of shoots at her and he's like, I don't want this. Like, I don't want to control it, And so there is a real battle there, and you can't help but feel bad for Bruce Banner because, and I wrote this in my notes because I wanted to not forget it, where he didn't know what he was doing in the first place with the experiments. Like, Ross makes that clear. Like,
right.
We didn't even tell him what he was doing. In fact, he thought he was doing the exact opposite, which is why he imbued himself with this shit to begin with. And that's really nuts. I mean, it's very different than what happens in Iron Man, where a man just realizes he's funded war, right? Or Spider-Man, where he experiences this great loss, personal loss, and this tragedy. Also, he gets bit by a spider. But here it's like, wow, this guy was lied to, and he is the victim, like 100%. And it's scary. He's got I love the heart monitor thing, where it's like he's got to monitor his heart. Great. Like, he has to learn how to calm down. He's with that Portuguese guy, that Brazilian, I don't know if it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're learning how to breathe. And he does that weird thing with his stomach where it's like, oh shit.
Cool shit.
So what do you think about all of that? I mean, what do you think that the movie's trying to say specifically about Bruce Banner, and what do you think about the kind of gray portrayal of him? Because I like how he's reluctant. It's not like Iron Man where he's stoked, right? It's the exact opposite, actually. Iron Man is like, I'm Iron Man. And it's like the exact opposite thing the superheroes are supposed to do. Or Batman, who's obviously DC, but Batman's a little more reluctant and plays by a very significant set of rules.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. I feel like there's a lot of depth here. More depth than I would have known that the Hulk was even capable of. I hate to say that because, again, going back to my friend Jeremy, my old editor-in-chief, he's a great guy. He's a smart guy. Why didn't I trust that if he had a real passion about the Hulk? I was like, maybe I should pay attention to the Hulk. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, super compelling. I mean, because you're right. It isn't about vengeance. It's not a personal vendetta. It's not about loss. It's not about an awakening like Iron Man, where you're like, I should do good instead of lending to the horror of the world. I should actually, make a change for good. It's something completely different. It's lamenting that you're the weapon. And, they have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys could correct me if I'm wrong. In the comic, I think Bruce is involved in all of these experiments. But I think what happens to him, how he becomes affected by the gamma rays and the radiation and everything, is he's rescuing somebody. He runs out onto the tarmac or something. I don't know if it's a kid or a soldier that kind of gets in the way or is located where he's not supposed to be. But that's why he's actually rescuing somebody, I think. And he's just a scientist, obviously.
But that's not the way it is in this, right?
No, I don't
think. Am I misunderstanding it? Because doesn't he say like that he injected, the general I thought says he injected himself, or he says it, that he injects himself thinking that he's working. Because he's like, the general says, like, I would have never told him what he was actually doing.
Right, exactly.
Which is common in skunk works and stuff like that. So you assume that, I mean, that's not uncommon. A lot of people don't know what the fuck they're really doing.
No, exactly.
Because if they did, they wouldn't make the devices.
Can you imagine? That's kind of the horror involved in the whole thing, like real science or, weaponizing science and all that kind of thing. No, I think you're right. And they're a little vague about it too, which is okay. Maybe because they change it from the comic or whatever. And again, I don't know exactly what happened in the comic just from reading, but I always did think the Hulk's message, even dating back to the, Bill Bixby, 1970s, late 70s Hulk series is, was always like a message about anger specifically, but maybe it was Alex, right? Maybe Alex is right. Maybe it's something more. The larger picture is just asking the question, can you change who you actually are? And it's just from a fan perspective or a superhero perspective, he's a really compelling hero because they're trying to weaponize this technology and he's trying to stop it, even though that's who he is. And the tragedy is already done. He finds eventually that he can't really undo this thing. And it's very similar to something like the Iron Giant, right? Where you discover you're the weapon and you don't want to be. It's not who you really are. And then it becomes, even in the throes of doing good, like let's say the Hulk becoming an Avenger, it's kind of an unknown commodity because it's kind of uncontrollable. So it makes it even more tragic, which I think makes it an even more compelling story where it's like, this is really, quite a tragedy. And also like becoming the monster, but having that very human heart inside, which was a big part of the Hulk, his obsession with like puppy dogs or, there's still like a sweet natured thing, a sweet natured countenance, a heart beating underneath of that terrifying monster, which is a great part of the story too. I think, again, harkening back to the Frankenstein story of like, he didn't ask to be created. Now he's kind of stuck with who he is. And, people treating them like a monster, being treated like you're a monster,
And it's cool. I think it's that connection that makes he's like the janitor and like the handyman at this Portuguese or this Brazilian Coke factory, this soda factory. And I think that that's what makes it so cool because he's just trying to live as inconspicuously as possible. Although I was getting a little annoyed because during the chase sequence, it's like all right, he's wearing a red sweatshirt and like a yellow backpack. And it's so funny when he first sees Blonsky or whatever that guy's name is, he like, could you act any more conspicuous? He's like looking around. It's like, Jesus Christ, Ed Norton. But
And that was a funny scene.
It's just like, it is, because I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Also, someone wrote into us, although I didn't use it, saying that like that scene apparently changes from day to nighttime, like constantly. If you look at it.
I read about that, how often it does that also with the weather in this movie. But I have to say, I must be really naive because I really wasn't noticing that.
Me neither. I'm pretty good. Like I was actually showing Micah because I'm pretty good at noticing like changes on set in scenes when.
Yeah.
And in Nightmare on Elm Street, which was, for people that are listening, the last episode we did, 1984 film, I was like, look, and I rewound it. I was like, there was one of the liquor bottles from the mom, like just was removed from the scene.
I noticed that. Yeah. A big continuity.
Right. Continuity error.
Foible in the kitchen.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot because every time that happens in a movie, I'm like, I'm going to look for it. This must be a mess. But, there's always one or two. You look at a Scorsese movie, that's really conspicuous. I don't know if we have talked about this before. In Goodfellas, very bad continuity errors in that film. So nothing is immune. Every movie is going to have some bad ones, but I usually don't catch them.
As I understand it, there are like experts in the film industry that are like in charge of that, right? Like
continuity. Yeah, it's a whole job. Yeah. You have to
imagine being like, you missed this massive continuity error. Thanks.
My God.
You're fired.
It's inexcusable in animation because you're so, in the minuscule throes of like a few seconds of cuts, like you're constantly looking at it and there's constantly people looking at it. There's layout artists and storyboard and prop, and it goes through animation, it goes through editing. So if you don't see it in animation, I have no, I have no forgiveness for that.
It's like
but
the
live action's a little trickier.
It's like the Starbucks coffee cup in Game of Thrones, which was like a funny ass thing. Did you remember that? When there was like
in
the last season, there's like a Starbucks coffee cup like on a table, like blatantly.
Oh, I have to see this.
And HBO actually went back and like edited it.
Oh, they did.
So there's footage of it, but yeah, like it's not, you wouldn't be able to find it.
Oh my God.
Not through their channels.
Oh my God. I got to see this. Hopefully
you'll find it. Oh, I'm sure it is. If you look, you'll find it.
That's awesome.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the antagonist.
Right.
Well, the antagonists, I guess we can talk about both of them.
Yeah.
You were talking a little bit about Thunderbolt, but first I actually want to talk about Blonsky, the Abomination, Tim Roth. Now, I like Tim Roth a lot, actually. But I feel like this was a weird casting decision because of this one reason. He is about 17 feet shorter than William Hurt. And I don't know if this is maybe a comic book thing, but there are so many shots of them where I'm like, this is comical. Like William Hurt is a head and a shoulder above this man, at least. And there's weird shots of trying to mitigate it, but there's like, when you first see them in their dress, like in their army dress clothes, like they're walking through a hallway at the Pentagon or something, and I'm like, this is insane. I don't know why they did it like this. That was my one major problem. I'm like, frankly, Tim Roth looks like a little punk. And I guess maybe that was the idea because he's supposed to come and become this. He also looks a little doughy. And I don't know if like, I was surprised by that because when you see Ed Norton in the beginning, I'm like, wow, Ed Norton's pretty jacked. Now, I don't know if there was something where, because I can tell there was a scene where Tim Roth is just sucking it in. Like you can tell. And I don't know. I like him. I just don't know that I'm crazy about his performance in here because I just don't think it resonates within, like, if you go back, I'm telling everyone, go back and look at the scenes between Thunderbolt and Abomination and tell me that.
Yeah, it's a little strange.
Now, again, I don't know if that's because it's like, very small to very big. He's obviously becomes bigger than the Hulk, but I don't know. I thought that was a little strange. Plus the whole like British, like, we're going into Brazil. It's so quick that we can't get the proper personnel to go. We're going to send some randos into Brazil in this international incident. And we're also bringing a British Marine with us. Like, I'm like, okay, cool. But those are minor quibbles. What did you think about Tim Roth's performance, which as I understand is also a one-off? I was actually looking to see if he appears later. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. So
if I'm remembering correctly,
I think
so.
I know that William Hurt does. I think he's the only one.
He does.
As I know.
He comes back.
Does Liv Tyler come back?
Not that I remember. Yeah. That's a good question, but not that I remember. No.
Yeah.
Which anyway. would have been a pleasant return. But yeah, on paper, again, we talked about it earlier in the conversation. Very strange casting from soup to nuts. I mean, from A to Z, this is a very strangely cast movie. You look at it, you're like, Tim Roth really as a villain? I think of Tim Roth, first of all, besides the physicality, which I agree with you on, I think there's a story behind that. But for the most part, with Blonsky, I think Tim Roth brings like a really offbeat style to the screen. And I don't know if that's because of how we got to know him in cinema. I think of Reservoir Dogs, obviously, Pulp Fiction, Four Rooms. I'm naming all Quentin Tarantino projects, but he brings a very offbeat, sort of fidgety, quirky, indie movie flavored thing, if that makes sense, to a film where I don't know if it's his Englishness or just the fact that he's a little, his eccentricity bleeds through a little, but I don't think of him necessarily in a blockbuster film. And I don't necessarily think of him as like a heavy or a villain in a blockbuster movie, a superhero movie specifically. But I have to say, I liked him in this. I think his physical stature is interesting because like you were saying, I think the only thing I could think of too is like that contrast of being the human commando to becoming the Abomination character. Which I didn't know Abomination from the comic. I knew the name, but I looked up what he looked like in the comic, and he's really cool looking in the comic. He looks like a jacked up merman type character. You know, he looks like a jacked up, like I don't know, like Castlevania character, like the merman from the first Castlevania, right. But huge, but buff. Super, super cool. I don't know if I like the look of him in the film, but I think Tim Roth was saying in an interview or something that I read that the physicality was on purpose. Like they wouldn't let him train and work out, which was actually hard for him because he did a lot of his own stunts in those scenes where he's already jacked up on the serum or whatever, and he's doing the super fast running. And
those are cool scenes where he's like,
he's on wires.
I wonder how. Oh, is that how it is? Because I was wondering, I'm like, are they making everyone run really slow or something?
That would have been. I bet that was a part of it.
Yeah,
that seems like a nice practical.
But it was super
solution.
cool. I was like, those are cool ass shots because you could tell it was practical. Yeah, it looked great.
Yeah, they look really good. But he was saying it was hard because that stuff was physically trying, and he wasn't really in great shape. Like they they called for like that doughy sort of out of shape appearance, but he's also supposed to be this, you know, really cunning commando with all this fighting prowess. So I'm not sure exactly how that works. But the overall performance was surprising to me. Like he worked in the role, and I didn't see, you know, Reservoir Dogs Tim Roth or his bank robber character from Pulp Fiction. I saw like a proper portrayal of a character. So again, it was a surprise for me that it worked so well. But I don't think he does reprise that role. I don't think we see Abomination pop up. And it was also kind of a strange villain. I don't know if Abomination was like an Origins villain, but you think of more iconic villains, like you said earlier, Rhino.
Oh, so Rhino is from this, and Juggernaut are both because
they're weird because they're Avengers villains.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, Rhino in my mind is a Spider-Man villain.
He is a Spider-Man.
And Juggernaut is an X-Men villain. Like
yes, we know him from X-Men too. But everything sort of crosses over.
Interesting. Meanders, that's what I'm interested in. Like, who came from this first? I guess I got to read about that. Because, like, you think about Colossus and other characters too. Like, there seemed to be, and like you said, the Thing from Fantastic Four. I had no idea that the Hulk was a spinoff of that. So that's really interesting. But yeah, you know what I do like, and it really isn't what Tim Roth brings to the character per se, but I just like the idea of this guy who's like, he's over the hill. In fact, for a soldier, you know, they're like, what are you, 45? And he's like, I'm 39.
Right.
And it's like, wow, you really.
And that's why he wants that.
Right, exactly. And I think that was very compelling, like a very compelling angle, being like a guy who's over the hill, seeing and not being scared, but rather being like, holy shit, this is awesome. Like, he's not scared of the Hulk.
No,
he's in awe of the Hulk. He wants it. And it was so funny because when the Hulk like kicks him, I was like, oh shit.
I love that scene.
But for me, not being familiar with it, I'm like, they just fucking killed Tim Roth. Like, that was like literally the end. And then there's some other villain now is going to come or whatever. Very Game of Thrones type move where I'm like, well, that guy's not important anymore.
That guy's gone.
But that wasn't. And then when he came back in the hospital, I was like, oh, okay. Like, it's very, very superhero. But I am very compelled by the whole idea of a super, like his antagonist being a guy. It's actually great because the Hulk doesn't want, or at least Ed Norton's Hulk doesn't want this. The Abomination wants it, but doesn't have it. The Hulk has it, but doesn't want it.
Right.
And they can't conceivably transfer it from one to the other because one has malign instincts, right? So it's really cool. I just don't know that it's brought to bear by meekness that I guess they put into him, because I noticed that and I just thought it was weird. It's for the same reason you did. I was like, well, he may be over the hill, like, Royal Marine or whatever, but he's still a Royal Marine. You would think that
Sure.
he would at least be Jack. But I understand maybe they're trying to make that sort of dissonance. What did you think about Liv Tyler as Dr. Moss? That was great to see her. We obviously did 3 of her movies recently with the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah, of course.
She doesn't do very much. I always forget about that, but she has been very selective forever. And I think the most famous thing she's done recently is probably like The Leftovers, which I still haven't seen. I really want to see. I love the idea of like a, like a rapture type event happening. Yeah.
Great concept.
And yeah, great. And so, and she's in that show Harlots too, which I still haven't seen. Although I think Dana was the one that said that. Was good.
I don't even know about that show.
But yeah, she's been very selective, and I really enjoy her quiet, calm delivery, because when she has these flare-ups with her father, they shine much more. And I love the scene when I didn't know, because again, I don't know anything about these characters, where I didn't know that was her dad until it's great. It's a great scene where she screams like "Dad" finally, or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah, the reveal. Yeah.
Right. So, what did you make of her performance?
Yeah, I love what you said. She does have a very quiet, subdued sort of delivery and an acting style. She's interesting because, of course, we think of her from Arwen in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And she's so good in that role because I think she embodies the elf thing, not just with her physical beauty, but with her demeanor. I think she's interesting because she's so beautiful, but I still buy her as like the sympathetic girl next door character, despite the way she looks, which I think speaks to her acting ability. I think she's quite good. Sometimes in this film, for me, she's a little too breathless. Like she's a little too subdued.
Sure.
But for the most part, I thought she did a great job. And you're really rooting for her right alongside of, Ed Norton's Bruce. You're really rooting for her the whole time. You want to see her. You want to see it work out for her. And there's just a sweetness. I have the feeling Liv Tyler is probably pretty cool in real life. I think she's the type that's stuck on herself and stuff like that. She just shines through the performance a little bit for me,
Let's get into some of these other questions here. I want to go to Mike Vernette. We had brought up some of the practical effects, but he wants to know, it says, first time, long time. Welcome, Mike. What do you guys think of the CGI in this film? Do you think it still looks good by current day standards? I do. And I really liked, again, I was kind of starting to phase out a little bit during the actual fight sequences, but I like that. And I guess they kind of did this because it would make sense. Like Hulk is naked would be technically naked in the factory. Sure. So that they get into that a little later. You kind of put 2 and 2 together. I love the scene when she throws the purple pants at him. Like, I thought that was a really cute scene. And they're like his classic, like,
I love that. I love that they did that.
But yeah, there's something to be said about the seldom use of special effects in this movie, at least at first, such that I guess it makes it shine later on, but it makes it hold up. I'll also say that this came from an era where things are starting to hold up now, and they still do, especially when you have big $100 million plus budgets, which this movie did. So what do you make of the special effects as opposed to the practical effects, which are so very much required in a movie like this? You can't do it. You could do the Lou Ferrigno, who makes a great cameo. It's awesome to see him.
Cameo. That's so fun.
Yeah, it's great. But it doesn't work. I mean, that's when you look back at the Hulk from the 70s, which I've never watched.
Yeah.
I know what it looks like, and I know Lou Ferrigno from that. And I know him because he was on The Apprentice, which is where I really knew him from. But you're not going to get away with that anymore. Even if you have the big buff 70s type bodybuilder who's like ridiculously big, like you need to portray the Hulk in comic book fashion. And
absolutely.
I think that's probably what makes him difficult. It makes it difficult to tackle because it's not like you can get away with a lot of Iron Man being in a suit around you it's great. Yeah. And you can't do that with the Hulk. So what did you make about the way they handled all that?
No, it's got to be much more dynamic. Todd McFarlane told us that years ago, not necessarily the Hulk, but we talked about with Spider-Man. Yeah. Marvel vs. Capcom Hulk. That's Hulk. Not only beautiful and colorful and well animated, but he needs to be that big compared to the other characters. Like Marvel vs. Capcom Hulk compared to Marvel vs. Capcom Wolverine is the way it should be. Like, look at that size difference. That's insane. Right. That's the way it needs to look, my friend. Yeah, the CG in this film I thought a lot about because I think it aged generally very well. And I was really trying to break it down and study it as the film went on. And I don't know how much of this is due to the director, Louis Leterrier, sort of a American/French-American director, responsible for the Clash of the Titans remake. That might have been from 2010, 2011. I know he did the prequel, the Dark Crystal prequel series for Netflix, which I think was canceled after one season.
Yeah, it was.
But I know he fancies himself as a very sort of fancy, sort of fantastic fantasy style director that's in touch with that sort of thing. It's in touch with the special effects, so the more superhero-y type thing. And I think he has a great eye for it. I think generally the CG of the modeling is a little bit rubbery. It's a little bit overly glossy of a finish. It doesn't have that 2021 level, certainly, of realistic translucency to the skin and, you know, the hair follicles and the nuances and the blemishes that help it feel like a tactile, actual, realistic model. It's a little cartoony, but there's great weight and great movement to all the business, and the camera work is really spot on. The kinetic energy and the constant moving of the camera and sort of the thoughtful planning behind that is very sophisticated, more sophisticated than you usually see. Like the camera and the cinematography is playing right along with the CG to make it work, if that makes sense. It's moving, everything's moving just so. The angle, the length of the shots, the editing, the cutting, it's really working. It's working in tandem with the CG instead of the CG working against the movie and standing out as too obviously crappy or too rubbery or not realistic enough. Even like, you know, we talked about the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man already. There's a lot of that rubbery stuff going on, but I feel like the camera covers up those areas. Like there's really great deft direction in this film that really makes the CG hold out. You know, we're talking about going on 15 years later soon, you know? So for that to be holding up to that 2021 modern hourglass, you know, and it's still working as well as it does, very few egregious things that stood out to me. And if anything, kind of plays almost like a style, which I think is very hard to do. And holding up to that, you know, present day magnifying glass, I think it still works great.
Sure. And I'm glad you brought up the cinematography just because that was really noticeable to me. Just not even in the action sequences. There's just a lot of great shots in the film. And I love the shot when Betty sees Bruce at the pizza shop and she's like talking to the guy and the guy like goes and like she sees him. It's like a great shot. And it stuck with me. I was like, wow, there's a lot of really cool. I'm not very sophisticated as a film watcher, but when I notice that kind of stuff, it must be something. I mean, there must be something there because I wouldn't have otherwise even noticed that.
You know what the CG... Did this bother you though, Colin?
Please.
This is something I thought of. Not just for Hulk, but for Abomination too. Like, you don't... And this could speak to the technology at the time. Maybe it was just too hard. The de-aging or blending wasn't there yet. But I didn't see Ed Norton in Hulk. And I didn't see Tim Roth in Abomination. Now, of course, as we talked about, in the late 70s, they were already doing that, using different actors for Bruce and Hulk, right? But I don't know if that bothered me a little too. It bothered me a little bit. Like, I know it's that Jekyll and Hyde dynamic. It's becoming somebody else. It's that transformation. But maybe it would have paid off to see a little more of the source character in the monster. And we didn't really see that. It almost looks like a completely different thing that they're turning into. So, and I think it's more effective when you see a little bit of Mark Ruffalo in the Hulk's brows or something, you know. And maybe, you know, again, I don't know if it bothered you, you thought about it, but it could speak to the times.
I did notice that because there are shots they do. He comes at the camera a lot. Like, so first of all, I'm like, wow, this guy's a great head of hair, and also, yeah, so he doesn't. It doesn't pop like that. I did notice that, but I didn't know if that was, you know, again, the intention or the way the Hulk is. Let's see here. We have a few more questions I wanted to touch on. Emilio Farr wrote in and said, hey, fellas, this is not considered to be in the upper echelon of Marvel movies. Having said that, what would you have changed about this movie to make it a little more interesting? So we were talking a little bit about the runtime. I think the pacing's pretty good. I don't have a problem with the 2 hour 15-minute movie at all. But again, the action, the banging toys together action that's necessary in a movie like this just doesn't do it for me. So for me, like for my own tastes, less of that and more of like more character. I would have loved to see more of that. But otherwise, it's kind of surprising to me that this movie is not considered stronger. Again, that's what makes me excited to see more, because if that's true, then the movies must get pretty good. I mean, if people really feel that way,
they are,
then they must be pretty damn good, because I think that this is Iron Man, I think is better than the Hulk. And I would put those in that order, but my assumption was that a lot of the movies were going to be worse moving on. So yeah, my expectations are raised. I don't know what I would have done. In fact, knowing that Ed Norton kind of rewrote a lot of the film, and that was what caused a lot of the strife. And as I said earlier, he was talking about, I wanted to bring up the quote about how he said that people shouldn't know about the making magic, or making movies is like a magic that people shouldn't know anything about, like, and it ruins it. And I don't know if you had read that interview with him where he was saying, like, basically, this is kind of, because there was a lot of back and forth, which I didn't know at the time, about like his anger on set and all this kind of stuff, and kind of rewriting the film and saying basically, I wrote the film, which he didn't. I don't think. I think he just kind of rewrote parts of it, because the guy that wrote like Men in Black and stuff wrote the movie.
Right.
And so it's just fascinating to me that it somehow, I guess, gets better from here, and yet it's not considered in the upper echelon. So I want to see how I feel about that. What do you think about that? And you have a lot more context than I do.
Yeah.
Do you think this movie's in the upper echelon of the movies that you've seen from the MCU? And what would you change to maybe make it more so?
I think it's easier for these earlier films. It's a little unfair, because I think it's just a lot easier for these earlier MCU films pre-Disney to get overshadowed, because as you go forward in time, as you march along with the various movies, you get bigger budgets, you get a larger star-studded cast as, you know, the characters grow, and as the Avengers are assembled, you have bigger set pieces, better CGI as the years progress, and, you know, much bigger budgets and more compelling villains. You know, the infighting with the Avengers that happens, like a lot of like really compelling storylines. So I think there's probably some revisionist history in that. I think if people go back and watch this movie and give it a fair shake, I think, you know, they'll probably like it. You know, I think with Ed Norton, it's interesting, because I think it kind of was beholden to a conflict of vision, really. I think he was really felt like he had the right idea, that his vision for the film was right in his rewriting. I think Leterrier gave him some wiggle room as far as, you know, doing that. I think it's interesting too, if you go back, like Louis Leterrier wanted Mark Ruffalo from the beginning, even back to this point in time. So that's an interesting thing, that Ed Norton came onto the role. I think it's interesting that it was to hear that it was contentious, because I watched on YouTube them do their press junkets, their PR push for the film. It's Liv Tyler and Ed Norton and Leterrier sitting together on panels for 10 minutes at a time. They seem perfectly congenial. You know, they seem perfectly at ease with each other. They're telling stories. They're giving you anecdotes from the making of the movie and laughing and stuff. So, you know, again, they're actors. How much of it is put on? But I'm not sure it was as contentious as people make it out to be. Plus, Ed Norton's, even if you don't like the writing of the film, Ed Norton's portrayal of Bruce Banner is pretty good. I could see it. I don't know how he would play against the actors to come when they're all assembled, but I could see him playing the Hulk as much as Ruffalo. Again, I think he brings even stronger chops. He just brings a different look to the role. He brings a little more toughness and a little less of that aw shucks, sweet, you know, maybe empathy inducing thing. But that being said, I was rooting for him in this film, and I was a pleasant surprise. I enjoyed it. It's
surprising, because I thought he was plenty empathetic. I don't know. I how much more empathetic are you going to be with the Hulk than that?
Yeah.
From my perspective, but
Ruffalo has that baby face. I mean, maybe it's just the pure physicality You know, he's also very soft-spoken. Ed Norton's a little tougher. He's a little pointier. He has a little bit of a sharper edge to him. You know, and maybe also, like, this is a thing, too, about film and watching movies and being critical. I think we take, at least for me, I could tell you, like, I take the actor's history, their past performances, and I probably unfairly tie it in. Like, I think of Ed Norton in American History X, for instance, right? The whole skinhead thing and how hard it was for me to watch that movie. Very tough movie for me to watch. And I take a little piece of that. That's not Ed Norton. That's him playing a character. It's certainly not Bruce Banner, but you know, you kind of take that and you tie it in, or you think of Ed Norton in Fight Club, or you think of him in The Score or anything else that he's been in. And you it makes you sympathize with actors a little bit, even though they're millionaires and they're very successful and they're known the world over. Like, you have to be careful of your choices, because it's the way people are going to judge you are tied up in those things that you do and the projects that you're involved in. And I think I might do that a little bit with Ed Norton. And I think that's one of the reasons I was surprised that I liked him so much in this, is that it's not Ed Norton in 25th Hour. It's not Ed Norton in American History X. It's, you know, he was bringing something different.
Yeah,
and
he's got range.
Speaks to his chops.
Yeah, he's got range for sure.
He does. He does.
I mean, speaking of all this, Walt Duncan wrote into us and said, "Hi guys.
Walt.
Supposedly Edward Norton exited the MCU because the filmmakers with which he partnered on the film had been given too many stipulations about how the follow-ups needed to work, handed down from the Marvel Studios, very much like why Edgar Wright exited his Ant-Man before finishing. But if the Incredible Hulk crew and Norton had stayed in the universe, what would you have been excited to see from Norton's Banner and more generally all their influence on the MCU, differences in actors, character relationships, or story arcs?" You have much more insight again into this than I would, but I love that kind of what if stuff. We were just talking, Mike and I were, I'm bringing her up a lot today, sorry, but we were just talking
that is
about,
your girlfriend.
Yeah, she's also like the only person I ever talked to. But we were just talking about, she brought up Magnum PI for some reason. And I was like, hey, did you know Tom Selleck was supposed to be Indiana Jones? And we got into this whole conversation about that. And I was like, imagine. Now, I don't know that Tom Selleck made the right move or the wrong. Magnum PI was huge. So I think that it was kind of like a neutral move, right? For him,
right.
For his career. But I was like, can you imagine if Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones? Like, that changes like everything. Like, we wouldn't know any different, but it should. So I was thinking about that, projecting it forward with Ed Norton, where I was like, there are probably a lot of people that were pretty hung up on this. I think I'm going to be less hung up on it. I like Mark Ruffalo, so that makes it easy, but I am most intrigued by like, what would happen to all of this if you just took Ed Norton and put him in there instead of Mark Ruffalo? Would anything be different? Because there's obviously no standalone Hulk movies anymore, but would anything have changed? Would that have set off a butterfly effect that would have done something different for the MCU, better or worse? I have no idea. But
it's a great question.
But in thinking about, like I was saying, like, he is a very famous actor, and a very, very well respected high end actor.
Yes,
absolutely. To me, it is one step below getting Leonardo DiCaprio in the MCU, as far as I'm concerned.
I think that's true.
You know, or getting, you know, someone like that.
Very, very.
Anyone in that sphere. Yeah, exactly. Like, so
one echelon below.
Right, like just one tier below.
And that's DiCaprio. He's like one of the best of his age. That he's he's going to go down in history as one of the best ever.
That definitely. I mean, definitely.
100%.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Certainly of their generation. You know, it is an interesting question. Like, what would Ed Norton bring that maybe Ruffalo or another actor wouldn't bring had he? What would be the advantages of keeping him on? I could see it being troublesome if he is in fact difficult to work with and not a team player. You have films later on, no spoilers, that involve 20 heroes, 20 main heroes. I mean, if you take all the Avengers and all the Guardians of the Galaxy and they're in the same film together, sometimes in the same scene together, that could be troublesome for somebody that's not a team player, because there's no way you could have 20 egos calling the shots on that soundstage, you know? So that might have been pretty destructive if he is in fact like that. And I think he is probably pretty opinionated. Let's say that, you know, he's not going to be the one who's like going to stow away his opinion and just go along. Like, he's going to make his voice heard. So that for me, that would be one thing I could see might cause some friction moving forward from, 2010 onward.
It's a great point. It's a great point.
He's friends with Ruffalo too, I think.
That's what I read that too. And that, obviously there's no beef between them, and why would there be? I mean, it's not like Ed Norton fell off the face of the planet. He's incredibly rich and storied actor.
Multi-millionaires.
Oh my God.
Many times over.
Yeah. Many, many, many times over. I would assume Ed Norton has $50 million or more probably in net worth. So,
I mean, but then again, look at a guy like Ed Norton, right? What has he done? 2 or 3 projects with Wes Anderson?
Yeah.
You don't work with directors in that sort of collaboration and be difficult. You know what I mean? One of the most important, I would argue, one of the most important directors going right now for the past 15 years. No, you're in Wes Anderson's stable and you're difficult to work with. I don't know about that. You know?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right.
Yeah. I think like many things, I mean, I worked in entertainment media for a long time, and there were, you wonder about the way the story was reported, just because I know that I didn't report on stories because I knew they were going to be taken out of context. One of the stories I did not report, I think I've discussed it publicly, so I don't really care, is that when I was writing the history of Naughty Dog, Amy Hennig, who is the writer of Uncharted and the creator of Uncharted and creative director of that series, she's no longer at Naughty Dog.
Okay.
She had said to me that she had never one time experienced sexual like impropriety or harassment in the industry ever. She told me this back in 2012 or 2013. It was when Uncharted 4 was under development. And I remember my editor-in-chief being like, you should definitely pull that out and write that. And I'm like, there's no way I'm writing that. Like, and he's like, why? And I'm like, because it doesn't do any service to the subject. We know exactly why we're writing this, because it's going to bring a lot of views and a lot of contention, and all it's going to do is annoy Amy and ruin her access. So I'm like, I'm just not going to put that in the story. It has nothing to do with anything. I don't even know how it came up. And I always think about that when I read entertainment stories and then the claims, or in politics, anything where people are like, well, that's not accurate. I've had many stories written about me that are not accurate. And I'm not saying that because I am the subject. They're just not accurate. They're not accurate stories. So I can only imagine that if you're Ed Norton, many magnitudes of fame, fortune, and talent above me, that they're going to write even bigger hits about you. And so being kind of in that realm, I understand that to be skeptical of almost any claim someone makes about a creator. The one thing I will say about Ed Norton, about if he is a little prickly, is like, well, I don't know that I really am mad at lead actors being prickly, because it's one of those things where he goes to the director, he goes to the writer, whoever, the producer, and be like, dude, I'm the fucking one on the screen. So I should definitely probably be okay. I'm not going to say that I'm a better, as Ed Norton or something. I'm not going to be a better writer. I don't know the filmography or the finer points of filming something, but I am the actor, right? And so it's a little different than being like a factory worker, or even like a painter, because like you are the only creative person in that endeavor, as opposed to like kind of the synthesis of talents. So I just think with actors, it's the same thing with musicians, where you hear a lot about producers and musicians during albums being recorded, like a lot of strife, sometimes a lot of awesome collaborations. And both of those things happen, but you have to kind of cede to the musician at some point, like, listen, I'm the one playing it. It's me singing it. Like, I think it was Liz Phair. She, who was like, a singer-songwriter for a long time.
Sure, yeah.
She did that song Extraordinary like 20 years ago, which doesn't sound anything like her. And it was like a big pop hit. And she, I think, has expressed a lot of like, this was not even like a song I wanted to do. And then she had to go and like, it was like the single on her album. She had to go perform it on all the late shows and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, man, like, you got to kind of step up if you don't want to do it. No one cares about who produced that record or who wrote that song. Of course,
you're absolutely right about that.
No one gives a shit. No one knows who wrote that song unless you're in the music industry. They made all the money, but
there's like 100 people that care about that.
Right. Exactly. Maybe. It's just like in games where, frankly, like no one cares who directed this game.
Right.
I care. But as again, Micah always brings up, like most people, and we've talked about this many times, many people that play video games have no idea who even made the game they're playing. Like if you went and talked to a Resident Evil person who played Resident Evil Village, it's like a 50% chance they're gonna be like, I have no idea who even publishes this game.
Absolutely.
And that's strange to me, but that's the way people absorb. That's the way I absorb movies. When people are like, oh yeah, that's like a Paramount film, or something, I'm like, I have no idea if that's a Paramount film. I mean,
the studio? No, I don't.
The only reason I know like that Red Dawn, for instance, is an MGM movie is because of like all the drama that happened at MGM because of the remake. Like that's the only reason I even make that connection, and that's one of my favorite films. Like I don't know who did Willy Wonka. I have no idea who owns Willy Wonka, and that's like one of my favorite movies.
Right.
So I'm going on, but I kind of forgive that. If you're the front
No,
facing
you're absolutely
person,
right.
it's like having a speechwriter and then just going
Right.
and reading the exact thing he wrote without editing it at all yourself.
You're absolutely, dude, you're absolutely making great points here. Because I think no true creative, no matter what your specific avenue is going to be content without having their voice heard to some degree. And you hope that every project, every film, every animated series, no matter what every album, no matter what the creative project is, you hope that in a perfect world, there's some sort of collaboration. Like everybody gets a kick at the can. Not that you want too many cooks in the kitchen, but everybody involved creatively should have some sort of, they should be given the ability to be heard and to kind of throw their 2 cents in and make it theirs, or at least feel that it's theirs to some degree. You know, somebody's got to usher the project. Somebody's got to step up and be the leader or whatever. You got the director, you have whatever. Creative directors, art directors, all that kind of stuff. Somebody's got to lead the team, but everybody should be involved in having their creative input, you know? And that's how you hope it really is. So maybe that's all it was. And maybe that's unusual in Hollywood. Maybe you placate a lot of people with that paycheck and just be like, do what you're told. Here you go. Ching, ching. You got a big check to put in that ATM machine next week. But you're going to come in, you're going to do what you're told, you're going to do what the suits tell you, the monkey suits, the bean counters, the directors, the producers, they're in charge. You come in, be the pretty face, stand on your mark, deliver your line. You know what I mean? I don't do that. I get my storyboards for animation. I'll be totally honest with you. I made a career off of doing this. And for right or for wrong, I'll look at the storyboard and say the acting could be better here, 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 and I change it. You know how many times people have told me to change the acting? No times. Not once in my career. I do it weekly for years because you're making it better. You know what I mean? And it's not that the storyboard artists couldn't have made it better. They're working under a deadline too. So I think it's my job to come in, look at the animatic and be like, all right, like I see what they're saying here. I'm going to preserve the idea of the scene, the interactions or whatever, but this could be a different pose. This could be a stronger expression, whatever. And I've been told 0 times to change it because it's part of the collaborative process. It's everybody's job to make it better when it arrives at their doorstep, to do their thing with it.
Right.
Then when it goes off to editing, they're going to do their thing, you know, when it goes off to compiling the show. So, you know, I don't go and change the character design because my scenes aren't going to look like everybody else. I think this guy should have a red nose. You know what I mean? And this is you can't do that. But yeah, you know, it's, I could speak to that. It's part of the collaborative process. And, you know, maybe it's that Ed Norton's not exactly, you know, look at him in interviews and stuff. He's not the most, you know, he doesn't seem like maybe the most generally thankful or friendly or magnanimous dude when he's sitting in the interview. He's not like really like humble, like DiCaprio or something where he's like, oh, it was everybody else, you know, I did a great job because everybody else put me in that place. He doesn't say things like that. You know, he'll tell you like, yeah, I came in, I studied it, I did the role. I was, you know, I think I was right for the role. Like, you know, maybe it's a lack of humility. We talk about that on the show sometimes. He doesn't really have that. Right. You know?
Yeah. I think the question to people is whether they earned it or not in that realm and whether it's problematic to everything else. Cause I love what you brought up about the animation, about kind of the sequence of animation. I always looked at writing like that too. And I had to learn to take direction. I was really bad. I remember having I don't know that it was like, I remember when I was a freshman at Northeastern, I was already writing professionally. Right. And I was taking like the mandatory freshman writing course.
Yeah.
And I remember basically being like, I am like thinking of the professor, like when I got a paperback being like, this is bullshit. Like there's no way that these edits are right. Right. And then and it's because I wasn't receptive to it because I was arrogant at that time too, being like, I'm 18 years old and I already get paid to write. Who the fuck are you? You know?
But do you look at it in retrospect the same way? Like,
no. I look at it now and I say like, no, I should be more receptive. I should have always been more receptive to feedback. Okay. I was not very receptive to feedback in college on my papers, on anything. Now I graduated with honors and did great, but I remember getting my capstone back, my first draft of my capstone with just, I think I've said this before, with red X's through pages, just like red X's. And I like literally couldn't tolerate it.
Wow.
You know, it was about the Dahlgren affair. People can go read about it. which is this thing that happened in the Civil War. But I was giving all of this Civil War background. Like I thought that's what we were supposed to do. And it was just like, after a while, it was like X, X, X. It was like literally like page after page after page of all this cited, written like history leading up to it. He's like, none of this matters. And I had to open myself up to be like, okay, I just spent like a month on this and now I need to do it again. And that was a really valuable experience to me. And then when I went into, being at IGN, you just have to be receptive to that. And it's funny because as of the time we're recording this, I just published an interview with Philip Mewson, who was fired from IGN for plagiarism 3 years ago. And I put up his first interview. He's never talked to anyone about the whole situation. And he was talking about the process of editing and how hard that was for him to get red marks back. And I was like, that's the fucking way it is, dude. And I to me, because he had the same people editing his stuff I did. I'm like, they made me better. I just think you were maybe in over your head.
Right.
I think you definitely were. Once that I was receptive to that, I didn't always think the edits were right. And to your point, sometimes I was just like, oh, this is an edit, and I would just right click and just undo it.
Oh, okay.
I do that too all the time. And by the way, it's the same thing. No one ever said like, hey, why didn't you put that edit in? I didn't always accept them, but I received them. And often I tried to look at it from a different perspective. Like, oh, I am really verbose. Like I was a really verbose writer, very verbose.
Yeah.
Incredibly verbose. If you go read old IGN reviews, they're like thousands and thousands of words.
Wow.
And now they're like probably 500 words. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So
no.
So being receptive to that, and then knowing that there are people along the factory belt, the conveyor belt, that are going to make it better and better. It reminds me of, like old newsrooms. You'd like give your stuff to a copy editor. He would mark it up. He would give it to the publisher. They would put it all on the block. You wouldn't even know. I don't think people even understand in news. Like you don't even name your own articles. That's something that an editor does. Right?
I don't think I knew that.
At IGN, we did, because we didn't have a normal functioning newsroom, and they still don't probably. Right. But if you work at the Wall Street Journal, you're not naming your own articles.
Oh, I didn't know that.
If you work at the New York Times, you don't name your own articles.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, like you hand off your copy, and then they do whatever they want with it. Like that's basically it.
That's pretty humbling.
Yeah. Like maybe it gets published on the front page, maybe it's half cut out, and you hear about that shit all the time. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. That's super interesting. Yeah, because
it's someone's idea. Your editor's it's because the idea is it's the editor's job to say like, what is the snappiest thing I can call this?
Yeah,
it's your job to write the snappiest thing, and then it's my job to make sure it's in that sequence. It would be the editor's job to make sure it's being clicked on or read.
Yeah, you got to grab eyeballs,
and so on and so forth. Exactly.
Yeah.
And all sorts of style. And I think about all the things even Greg taught me about writing, just by being receptive of that. One issue that he really nailed into me that a lot of people
I should have caught that.
Didn't know was, less than and fewer than. When people make that mistake, I want to strangle them. But I used to make that mistake. So you got to just be receptive to those certain things, and then it makes you better. Yeah. And the same thing with Dustin. So two other things I'm going on here, but with Dustin, I edit his posts sometimes. Like I write all of the things for the shows. I title them and I write the subject. All that stuff. Tell. But Dustin sometimes writes things, and I used to edit them and then be like, all right, now it sounds like I wrote it. And then eventually, he wrote like the letter to the audience about like the thing, and I was like, you know what, it's fine. There's no errors, because I was like rewriting things to be like, oh, it sounds like me. But the other thing is that I'm writing the role playing game, and I've had to let go of the idea that I can control that entire story. I can't do it. I can't write it by myself. And now that has forced me to open my mind even more to collaboration, because it's not my full time job, and I can't write this game. Like
that's hard.
I have to write the Bible and then give it to someone to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, and then keep an eye on it.
Right,
Steer it in the direction you want, direct it.
So it goes both ways, where like you and I are both control freaks with that, and I've had to really let go of that stuff over the last few years. Like really.
Yeah, you grow up, and you grow out of that, and you realize in our careers respectively, collaboration is really important. That's really the name of the game. And Indeed. You could learn. It strengthens you.
Indeed.
Steel sharpens steel. And I've used that certainly as a learning experience. And you also know, like on the flip side too, and not to sound conceited, but you also know when, because sometimes the people in power don't have all the answers. They're human. They don't have all the correct answers. And sometimes they're not in the right role. I mean, I've seen that too.
Definitely.
So when the notes don't make sense also. You got to use that judgment, but just being open and being honest and really just being a sponge and just knowing how to, how to monitor that, how to dictate and funnel that and filter that. That's really important.
Yeah,
and
and
you learn.
I love the whole middle management thing too. Like people that are just, there's a guy that IGN that he got fired or laid off like a few years ago, and I don't want to name him, but just a middle manager guy that anyone at IGN that who would listen to this knows exactly who I'm talking about. And what you basically did was just ignored him. Like you eventually learned, like any email he sent, like I just learned, I'm like, nope, trash.
Wow.
Like, and then eventually he just left you alone and just started picking on someone else or whatever.
As a rule, though, you would
like basically just like being like a guy that was trying to justify his role, right? And like just by being in everyone else's business, and I would just be like delete, and then just ignore it, and then it just went away. But you have to. It's very similar to Ed Norton going on with his big dick on the set. You kind of have to earn that, and by me not taking the heat, it actually ended up going on other people because I was just like, no.
God.
So then it just trickled on to someone else, and everyone knows if you work in creative field, you know that. As Dagan always uses the term bean counters, there are just people that are not creative in these industries. I often say about Sony, like PlayStation is clearly led by someone who does not play games. In Jim Ryan, he doesn't play games. If I sat down with Jim Ryan, I can expose that in 5 minutes. It doesn't mean he's wrong for the role. It just means that he has to trust his creative people. He's like bean counter. There are all these different kinds of roles in creativity, and hopefully you defer to the creatives for the creativity, and then you defer to the salespeople to sell it, and so on and so forth.
No, absolutely, dude. And you know what? I don't know why I think of Lego all the time. I'm a fan of Lego, although I'm not an active Lego guy. I don't build a lot of sets or anything like that. But I think of Lego, right? They make sets. There's these brilliant designers over in Europe, up in Connecticut. They design these sets. They know how to build. They're great creatives, also think in 3 dimensions. They're really brilliant at it. They're also beholden to the bean counters because those guys are part of the process and stepping in and say, look, we have a warehouse full of gray bricks. You have to incorporate 5 gray bricks in this set, So, and that should make the creatives more creative if they have to deal with that. So everybody brings a role, and if they're doing their job right, rightfully so, it's all an important part of the process.
Definitely.
But I've seen whole places where 80% of the people seem to exist just to justify their own jobs. That's not. Like, the person you were just describing at IGN, everybody has 1 or 2 of those. I've seen places with 60, 70, 80% of those people. Yeah. That it just seems like that's the wheel turning the place. That's the gear cranking along. That's keeping the engine running is these people justifying their own roles. They were basically note givers, where it was like, if we had just 30% more creativity here, we'd be much more successful, So it works both ways. Which is it's an interesting conversation. I could talk about this forever because it's the creative process, especially the collaborative creative process, is fascinating to me. Egos brushing up against egos and everybody wanting to, vying for success, maybe vying for money, the success of the project, their legacy, their reputation. Yeah. There's a lot to say. It's a cool conversation. I like that.
I do too. I used to have those conversations at IGN all the time, fights and yelling matches at people. And I don't know if it's like that anymore, but I used to say this about IGN, and it's not to be mean, although I don't like a lot of people that work there anymore anyway. Most of my people are gone long ago.
It's a change.
Yeah, it's like a whole new crew of pretty horrible roster actually. But I used to say at my time at IGN, like, I don't know what was going on the other side of the Chinese wall, like with product and all that, but in the creative part of the site, we could have lost half of our people and been fine. Like I definitely knew that at the bottom of my soul.
Right.
Like we don't, because I could see the traffic. I think Pear was saying like I was like in the top 10 of traffic for like 3 years after I left because I wrote so much.
Wow.
So
I believe it. I believe that.
So you see, and then you look, and then people are like, well, we shouldn't necessarily judge only on numbers. And I'm like, what do we judge on then?
That's the barometer.
Yeah. I mean, like what are we judging this on then?
Right.
If not the numbers. Well, I did this, this, and this. I'm like, well, I could also do that. So anyway, Dig, is there anything we haven't touched on for...
one thing I want to say that this movie did successfully for me compared to past Hulk iterations that I guess you get from the comic book, but when it's in motion and it's animated in front of your eyes, it's exciting, is the physicality of Hulk that I always imagined. That he's not just this lumbering, hulking beast with super strength. He's also pretty agile. So the way they have Hulk in this film jumping around and scaling walls and running, that aggression, that sort of lump, I don't know, like runaway locomotive type thing, where that sense of danger. They did that with the Abomination scene too, which I thought was really cool. I know you weren't really digging the action scenes, but that one scene where the soldiers fired the rocket, the RPG from the Jeep, and then Abomination's like, oh no, and then he's running up the city street, moving all the cars out of the way. I was actually pretty scared. I thought that was pretty scary. Yeah. I was putting myself in that soldier's position. Like, why aren't you running? Yeah. Like, why aren't you getting away from this guy? Here he comes.
Also, the scene of them backing up with the wheel off the
truck. And their wheels off, their axles broken. Yeah. Oh, dude, it's so good. It's cool. So awesome. Yeah. But they did a great job about that with Hulk. Like, and as he's scaling the building, he's breaking the bricks and he's smashing the walls. Like, you just see the strength and the weight come through. I was shocked that this was a 2008 film and that it was done with that sense of, that really realistic sense of weight and gravity and strength and menace. I thought that it really held up. It's a treat, because usually you see things over a decade old and it's like, oh wow, like they could have done this a lot better today. And this movie doesn't leave me feeling that way. It leaves me feeling like, all right, this is a proper part of the MCU legacy. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. It was a pleasant surprise, and I'm glad we watched it. I rented it on Amazon. You guys out there can rent it. I think it was available on like Apple Plus and stuff too to rent. And
oh, was it? Yeah, I think I watched it on Amazon too.
Yeah, so
not
I
Disney Plus.
Not like you said, not Disney Plus. Very strange. I think that's because Paramount has their own streaming service, and the Hulk lives there. So
yeah, you know what?
CBS All Access. Does that have to do with CBS, or is that its own thing? I don't remember. Because that's where like Star Trek is, I think, and stuff, right? Or something. Is
like
it
that. Now?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that has something to do with it.
Confused with who's together. Is it Comcast, Universal, Disney? I don't know.
It's Comcast, NBC, Universal.
Yeah, Comcast, right? NBC, Universal's part of that under that umbrella, I think. I know because they're in Philly. The Comcast towers in Philly, and they're all in there. But yeah, Amazon, $3.99. Definitely worth revisiting. Or if you guys haven't seen it, like me, you could watch it again. Or, just revisit it. Nice, quick 2 hours. Sure. Super fun. Get a little old school Ed Norton in there.
Definitely. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm glad that we got it. We'll continue to move on in the coming months to the next one. I don't know. What is the next Avengers? Is that right? Or is there something else?
Iron Man. It'll be Chronological.
Iron Man 2,
I don't think it's Avengers.
It's got to be MC Wiki. Yeah, it's got to be maybe Iron Man 2. Let's see.
It might be IM 2.
Yeah, Iron Man 2 is next, I think. So, and then Thor, and then the Avengers.
Oh, then Thor. Okay, cool. Lots to look forward to, my friends.
Indeed. Well, Dig, thanks for your time today. And thank you all out there for your
very much
love, kindness, and support of our show. Remember, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia for early ad-free access to every episode of the show, the ability to submit questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas to the show. Submit topic ideas, vote on others' topic ideas, etc., and so on. Dagan, as we always do, we'll end Knockback with a dad joke. I leave it.
Let's do it, my friend. I got one here. Now, Kyle, did you know when two vegans get into an argument, it's still called a beef?
No, that was a bad one.
I gotta get a clown horn.
Yeah, you should get a clown horn.
I really do need to do that.
Yeah,
wait, did we have one back when we recorded just audio?
We had a bell.
Oh, it was the bell. That's what it was.
Remember, and I couldn't hear the bell coming through the audio, so I didn't know if it was, but it was the entire time.
It turned out to be totally fine.
It was like I don't know. That was weird. That was a funny one. I love that one. That was our 100th episode. I think we did that.
Wow. And to think we're almost doubled that. Yep. Soon. Pretty soon.
Yeah. Dig, thank you for your time. Thank you all out there. Love, kindness, and support again. Appreciate you. And we'll see you next time for more Things Knockback. Remember, by the way, if you're new to the show, which we get new listeners every week, you have a lot of shows to go back and listen to. So
you really do.
Enjoy.
And tell your parents to listen to the show.
Yeah, please do. Please do tell your
I wanted to make it a family affair.
Yeah, I don't know if your family should be listening to this show, to be honest. But, well, whatever. I think it's like watching a sex scene with your family.
And your kids.
Definitely don't bring your kids. All right. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith.
All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.